think we'll quickly move into the next segment, which is really around leading disruptive change, and pick up the threads on Hotstar, because we love to learn a little more about what you did there, because it's a brilliant piece of work. I'll come to you, Mr. Biyani. You've kind of done many different things across your 2 decades and you've done it again and again, disrupting existing categories. Now, give us a sense, if you were to pick maybe one of the many things that you did, including a Big Bazaar, which I love as a concept. What do you think was the starting point there, really, to think about the point that Sanjay was making and Rajesh was making today, which is that let's be focused on what's changing at the consumer end instead of worrying about what competitors are doing. You've exemplified that. Give us a sense of how you thought about some of the more disruptive formats that you thought of.
I think, Indrajit, what we always, if you look at us, we call ourselves Future Group. So we always believed in scenario planning, and we have always been a proponent of design thinking. And the way we created our organization design way back, I think this must be 15 years ago, of how we will construct our business will be on lines of business. And we created lines of business: food, fashion, and home. And we'll deliver it through multiple formats. That's how we were able to create many formats. Today, as a company, we run one of the formats for one of the lowest class of society, state of society, called KB's Fair Price, which are non-air conditioned stores, to a food hall, which deals with creme de la creme of the country. We have been able to create multiple formats, and we have been able to sell food through various formats. We have been able to sell fashion through multiple formats, and we have been able to sell now home through multiple formats. And I think this design has allowed us to do much more than we could have done traditionally with one single format. Now, if technology-aided formats can come in, we can easily sell our products. So we never looked ourselves as a retailer. We looked at ourselves as a consumer goods company, creating products and selling it through various formats. What we are currently doing, which we believe can be a game changer, is fashion. We are nearly 92% of the business which we do is coming out of our own product and brands. We are doing a similar exercise in food business. We believe in the next 5 years, 70% of the food which we are going to sell in our stores, which will be our own brands, or brands in which we'll have some significant investment or stake in. So that, I believe, can bring about a significant change. Thirdly, this design allows us to destroy whatever we want and create anything new. So currently, we are also working on building a whole digital strategy on how digital consumption will shape up. So there is a lot of work, research happening, and we are using, again, scenario planning methods in terms of how many people can shop digitally, what is the products which can be shopped digitally, what is the cost of doing that operation, will they ever be able to compete economically with a physical store. And it's a continuous exercise, and we are meeting the world leaders, understanding the whole evolution of this business and how it will shape up. So for us, I think the challenge is to still remain younger, to deal with the younger customer, always be relevant in whatever we do. And we always feel good that we have brought in design thinking too early. We brought in organization design, which allows us to do multiple things. We have also created an organization which can destroy many things, and we are not at all emotionally attached to what we create, which we have done and demonstrated earlier. We believe a lot of things are going to change, and as an organization, we also believe in the credo that nothing is permanent and everything is going to change.
Mr. Biyani, you always make it sound so easy. I wish it was. No, every time I talk to you, you tell me how you've found it so easy to tear down whatever you've done. I wish it were that easy, because most people struggle with that. And I come to you, Rishi. Mr. Biyani talked about 2 things. One was the whole idea of organizational design. The other was the power of design thinking itself. In the organizations that you've studied and looked at, both in India as well as abroad, how many of them have kind of been able to, Apple of course is a great example, but how many of them have been able to embrace the whole power of design thinking, or for that matter, make design organizations in such a way for innovation and radical innovation to really happen on a consistent basis?
So I look at maybe these 2 things a bit separately. If you take design thinking to start with, clearly design thinking involves an empathetic understanding of users, the willingness to immerse yourself in the lives and the sort of daily routines of people who could possibly use your products and services. And I think ever since design firms like IDEO built a successful practice around design thinking, this has certainly become much more influential the world over. Just like there's been a democratization of innovation and disruption and so on, there's also a democratization of design. It's no longer just the province of people who've been to design schools, and perhaps no better an example than a company like Infosys, which is perhaps one of the last places one expected to see design thinking pervading the whole organization, is slowly getting transformed to incorporate that kind of an approach.
Right.
I think elements of design thinking have seeped in all over the place. I mean, it's getting into mainstream management curricula, and many companies across the board, even if they are not going whole hog on design thinking, are bringing in elements of design thinking in the way they look at innovation.
Sure.
As far as organizational design is concerned, I think the ability to disrupt and to make your organization adaptive enough, as Mr. Biyani was just suggesting, is not easy at all. I think, as one of the earlier speakers also mentioned, most organizations have a tendency towards inertia, and particularly if they are successful in a particular business, it's very difficult for them to venture into any arena which would disrupt their existing business model. Clayton Christensen, I think, addressed this issue many years ago in his book, The Innovator's Dilemma. And he said that if you really want to have the potential to disrupt, you have to be willing to create new organizational forms, maybe even arm's length subsidiaries or other sort of spin-offs from the company that are willing to embrace disruption, because it's probably very utopian to think that your mainstream business will be willing to disrupt itself unless you have somebody very courageous like Mr. Biyani at the helm who can push that. But in the normal company that you and I see every day, it's difficult to imagine that happening. So you really got to structure your organization in such a way that you have some parts of the organization which are not beholden to or subject to the decisions of the mainstream business, so that they can actually embrace disruptive ideas.
Rishi, I'll just kind of pick up the threads of what you said and just ask you a follow-up question, because the whole idea of like you said, I mean, of locating innovation outside the mothership is obviously, I mean, fair. I mean, people have attempted that, but then sometimes it's not enough. When you kind of bring it back and integrate it into the mother organization, sometimes that gets completely rejected. That whole culture, the whole way of doing things, and we've seen that. I mean, Xerox, I think, is a great example of that, and many other organizations, including, I think, Hindustan Lever, which tried to kind of locate innovation outside the mothership with the New Ventures team. Do you kind of have anything to respond by way of using that structure as a design concept, in terms of if you locate innovation outside the mothership, what are the challenges that come up? Because you're trying to do a lot of things inside and change from within, if I understand it right.
That's right. I think our belief and my belief is that it has to be within. It has to be within. The disruption has to be done for each business every day. And the dimension on which you will disrupt will keep changing. So it can't be a separate location. And I know you talked about Hindustan Unilever earlier, having a separate wing, where the rest of the organization continues to do what it does. And somebody else thinks about it and tries to change the rest of the company. Is very, very difficult to work. I think fundamentally it's a mindset that you are grappling with, besides the strategy of what to do. And that has to happen at the core of the business. So the issue that you're really grappling with more are the capabilities that you may require in a new environment. Do you have them in the organization or not? More than anything else. Because the new rules of the game are different, the new capabilities are very different. And do you have them? And do you really, are you able to play with the new rules of the game? That I see, those two are the biggest challenges I personally see when we are dealing with disruption.
So just to come to you raised Hotstar a little while ago, and we're all keen to learn a little more. That was a fairly bold decision. And how did you come to the realization that the timing was now, that we ought to do this now and not later? Because obviously anything as disruptive as this organizations tend to push away saying baad mein karenge, we'll do it later. There's no earth-shattering need because digital advertising businesses haven't yet reached any kind of critical mass.
That's right.
So how did you think through that?
I think one of the thoughts in the country has been that though there is a lot of consumer change, the bandwidths are not enough today. And therefore content consumption is very, very difficult. Smartphones are still limited, and that's been the conversation that I've had, and I'm sure this industry has had for a long time. But the reality is, the question that we have is whether we are not late, but are we late already, is the question in my mind, and not so much as to should we have done it later. And the core being, I think, looking back and defining what is the core of our business. Is that simplified what we needed to do? Once we agreed internally as a company that we are not a TV company, but a storytelling company, that really helped us take the big bold decision of saying what do we need to do on Hotstar. And yes, then we broke all the rules, honestly. This is the first time ever that we have put 40,000 hours of well curated content across 7 languages, across drama, movies and sports, into an on-demand destination. The learning of TV is it is done linearly delivered to you at a time. Here it is not linearly delivered. It is delivered to you when you want to see it. So you can choose your time. So if it's a cricket match, you will see it when you want to see it at that moment because it's urgent. But a drama you could see as per your convenience. So fundamentally, I think we have taken the core of our business at the core of Hotstar and the consumer at the core of our decision making. And honestly, the results have been staggering. It's been one of the fastest adoption of any digital platform in the world in the last few months. We launched in February. We have more than 30 million downloads of this already. We are getting 20 million people to come to it every month. Wow. And the most strikingly, I think the challenge was bandwidth and data consumption. And people said digital is a medium of you snack content here. You don't consume full length content. We are getting people when they come to Hotstar spending 30 minutes a day. Some consumers spend 1.5 hours a day in a country where pricing of bandwidth is a challenge, where bandwidth itself is a challenge, and where handsets is a challenge. So I think the question no longer is that have we done it earlier? The question is could we have done it before? Yes. And how much more do we invest today to rebuild this business?
Right. Phenomenal. So thanks for sharing that. Rajesh, you heard Sanjay talk about non-linearity, and I know in your New Rules of Business series spoken about that phenomena and how that's kind of shaping the way that the business landscape, right? We've seen it in retail, Mr. Biyani will agree, we're seeing it with banks. Walk us through what this means to your mind. What is your understanding of what non-linearity does to the experience, the customer experience?
See, what happens is most of the corporate people, barring let's say Sanjay or Mr. Biyani, who have really understood what customers want. Unfortunately, majority of corporates haven't understood that. So while both of our colleagues are proactive, majority of people aren't. So before I answer that, I just want to say what are the hurdles that stand in the way of people trying to become customer oriented so that they are able to deliver customers what they want. And this again comes back to this entire thing of mindset. I feel there are 3 things in terms of mindset that people need to be looking at. What most people do is that they look at past success as a prediction of future success. So as Harvard Business School has rightly said, success has failure built into it, and most people don't realize it, and they take their past success into future. That's a problem. Second is most people are scared about cannibalization, and here is Sanjay saying, he didn't mention it, but I'm sure the fear, the thought would have scared him. What about cannibalization? Like him, corporates should not fear cannibalization. In fact, the entire business, the size of Star business will grow. And the third thing which is very, very important is that most of the people measure the success of their competitor using their own yardstick. So if I may just say a very common example of Nokia versus Apple. Nokia had over 70% market share when Apple was launched. Nokia had one test by which they identified whether a handset was worthy of it being its competitor, and that was called a drop test. From 5 feet they dropped it. So when Apple came, they dropped it from 5 feet. Unfortunately, it did not work, and they said it's not a worthy competitor. So this is the mindset issue that most people have to get out with. And once they do that, then what will happen is that whether it is consumption of entertainment or retail, then they will naturally go to the customer. So I would just wrap up by saying, I think originally this whole concept was done by Titan versus HMT. HMT wanted customers to come to them, whereas when Titan was launched even 30 years back, they said, we don't want customers to come to us, we'll go to the customer. And once you start going to the customer, then you start giving them what they want, and that is what is non-linearity.
Right. Thanks, Rajesh. Rishi, I'll come to you very quickly. Sorry, unless Mr. Biyani, do you want to kind of respond to what Rajesh just said?
I was trying to put in the thought on the linear thinking.
Yes.
I believe the education as a process, when you write, it's very linear. When you read in linear, but the thoughts don't come linear. And when you are working on a business of ideas, the thoughts don't come linear. And how can an organization adapt to work with multiple thoughts coming at the same time?
Absolutely.
I think that's what an organization has to be created on, and that's what we are trying to do. That ideas will be non-linear, and execution of ideas, how can you create non-linearity to it?
Yeah, great. I'll come to the whole idea of education. Since you touched upon it, I was meaning to kind of go to Rishi and ask him. You're kind of training future leaders, but business schools itself are today challenged on a whole set of dimensions, because the way we learn and where we kind of create education which is relevant in today's world itself, the business schools are in some danger of perhaps being disrupted as well. Do you see that? How do you see that phenomena playing out across the education sector, particularly higher education?
In education, the fear of disruption has been around for quite some time. I remember maybe even as far away as 15 years ago, people were talking about how education would be disrupted, particularly by e-learning. I think the actual disruption process has not been as quick as was expected at that time. And the classroom and the university or institution of higher education continues to be relevant. However, there is a different set of challenges, and that set of challenges is, I think, related to some of the comments made by Mr. Biyani as well as by Sanjay. And that is the speed at which things are changing. Traditionally, we taught people through case studies. Case studies are very well tailored. They have nice tables and exhibits and graphs. You have all the data there and you can crank it out and you can get answers. But that's not the way business is happening these days. Business is happening at a much faster pace. As we just discussed, you have competitors from unexpected quarters. So you've got to be able to, yes, for sure, churn a lot of data, but you've even got to be able to figure out what's the right data to collect, how to analyze it, and how to use it to make good decisions. So I think business education today, in short, has to be much more dynamic. It has to be much more skill-oriented. We've got to use more of games and simulation, which can, to some extent, mimic the dynamism of the real world. We've also got to be able to get people to integrate and synthesize things better, because a lot of innovation actually rides on that synthesis ability. And our curriculum and the way we teach needs to start reflecting all of this if we want to be relevant.